Face mites. Demodex. Inside the pores around your nose, eyebrows, and eyelashes, tiny 8-legged animals may be feeding on oils and cellular debris. They are Demodex mites, not bacteria, not fungi, but microscopic relatives of spiders. Two species are commonly associated with humans. Demodex follicularum usually gathers inside hair follicles, while Demodex brevis tends to live deeper in the sebaceous glands that release skin oil. Their narrow bodies fit those spaces like living needles sliding into tiny tubes. But finding them does not mean your face is infected. Many people carry Demodex without irritation, itching, or any visible sign. The relationship changes when mite density rises or the skin's barrier and immune balance shift. Higher numbers have been associated with conditions such as demodicosis, blepharitis, and some cases of rosacea, but the mite is rarely the whole story. Skin inflammation, oil production, immune responses, and nearby microbes can all influence what happens. That is why trying to sterilize the face can create a new problem while chasing the wrong cause. These mites live, reproduce, and die inside the same ecosystem as bacteria and yeast. Their remains and the molecules around them may become more noticeable to the immune system when the population grows too dense. Think of Demodex as quiet tenants. A few can live unnoticed. Too many or a damaged building can turn ordinary neighbors into a disturbance. And while these animals survive inside oily pores, the next residents live much deeper, transforming food your own enzymes cannot digest. Gut bacteria. A meal does not end when your own enzymes stop working. The leftovers continue into the large intestine, where gut bacteria dismantle carbohydrates your body could not digest alone. Fermentation turns part of that material into short-chain fatty acids, mainly acetate, propionate, and butyrate. Butyrate can fuel cells lining the colon, while these microbial products also interact with the intestinal barrier and immune system. Your waste becomes their food, and their waste becomes part of your biology. But the gut microbiome is not one uniform crowd. The acidic stomach, oxygen-exposed small intestine, and densely populated colon are different habitats. Transit speed, diet, medication, mucus, and available nutrients all help determine which organisms thrive. Even two people who eat similar meals can carry very different communities that perform overlapping jobs. That is why labeling one species good and another bad can be misleading. A helpful organism in one network may behave differently when the surrounding community or intestinal barrier changes. Think of the colon as an industrial district running after the kitchen closes. One microbe breaks down the raw material, another consumes its leftovers, a third removes the gas produced along the way. The system depends less on one heroic bacterium than on a web of chemical trades. This is also why a single commercial microbiome result cannot define the health of an entire gut. It captures one sample from an ecosystem that shifts with food, time, and location. And this patchwork is not limited to your intestines. Move back to the surface and your oily forehead, damp armpit, and dry forearm become three completely different microbial climates. Skin microbiome. Your skin is not one habitat. It is a continent broken into climates. The forehead is oily, the armpit is warm and damp, and the forearm is cooler, drier, and exposed to everything you touch. Each zone selects a different community of bacteria, fungi, viruses, and microscopic residents. Sebaceous areas often favor Cutibacterium, while moist folds support more Corynebacterium and Staphylococcus. The difference is not random. Sebum, sweat, temperature, oxygen, and the skin's mildly acidic surface decide who gets food and who gets pushed out. But these organisms are not simply dirt sitting on top of you. Many compete with potential pathogens for space, break down skin oils, and communicate with immune cells near the epidermal barrier. Your skin is constantly negotiating. Tolerate this resident, block that invader, repair this tiny crack. The strange part is that a familiar organism can be harmless in one location and troublesome in another. Cutibacterium can live quietly inside oily follicles, yet under certain conditions, blocked pores, altered sebum and inflammation can turn the same neighborhood into acne. The organism did not suddenly become evil. The environment changed around it. Harsh scrubbing can create the same problem from the opposite direction, stripping protective lipids and damaging the barrier while trying to make the surface cleaner. Healthy skin is not empty skin. It is a stable ecosystem where no single resident takes over. And one of the most successful residents of those oily zones is not a bacterium at all. It is a yeast that depends on your skin for the fat it cannot make itself. Malassezia yeast. Malassezia lives on your skin with a strange dependency. Most of its species cannot make all the fatty acids they need, so they borrow them from you. This yeast thrives around the scalp, face, chest, and other sebaceous regions where skin oil is plentiful. It releases lipases that split sebum into smaller molecules, turning the oily surface into a private fuel supply. Under normal conditions, Malassezia is not an invader. It is one of the most common fungal residents of human skin, often living there without causing any visible problem. The trouble begins when the relationship changes. More oil, a weakened barrier, humidity, immune sensitivity, or changes in the surrounding microbial community can allow the yeast and its byproducts to irritate the skin. In dandruff and seborrheic dermatitis, the problem is not simply too much fungus. The skin's response matters just as much. Some people react strongly to molecules released when Malassezia breaks down sebum, while others carry similar yeast with barely a flake. The same genus is also linked to pityriasis versicolor, where altered pigment creates lighter or darker patches, and to certain forms of folliculitis that can resemble acne. That is why treating every oily bump as bacterial acne can miss the real mechanism. Malassezia is less like mold growing on abandoned food, and more like a tenant using the building's electricity. Most days, the arrangement works. Change the wiring, ventilation, or security system, and the same tenant can suddenly become disruptive. But the next ecosystem does not live on soft skin. It builds layered cities on a surface that never sheds your teeth. Oral microbiome. Run your tongue across your teeth after a long day. That faint film is not just leftover food. It is the beginning of a biofilm, a structured microbial city built on one of the few surfaces in your body that does not shed itself clean. Your tongue, gums, saliva, tonsils, and the spaces below the gum line each create different habitats. But teeth are special. Early colonizers attach to a protein layer on the enamel, then other species bind to them, stacking the community in layers. They produce a sticky matrix that works like scaffolding, holding cells together and slowing the entry of saliva, oxygen, and antimicrobial molecules. The surprise is that plaque itself is not automatically disease. The danger comes when the ecosystem shifts. Frequent sugar gives acid-producing bacteria repeated fuel. The pH falls, acid-tolerant species gain an advantage, and minerals begin leaving the enamel faster than saliva can replace them. That is how a stable community can move toward tooth decay. Below the gum line, a different shift may favor organisms that thrive in inflammation, creating a feedback loop. Inflammation changes the habitat, and the new habitat supports more inflammation. Think of brushing and flossing less like killing every microbe, and more like breaking apart a city before its walls become too organized. Saliva also matters. It buffers acid, carries minerals, and helps wash away loose material, which is why dry mouth can change the entire balance. But bacteria are not the only residents hiding inside this biofilm. The next organism is a yeast that can live quietly for years, then change shape when the neighborhood changes. Candida yeast. Candida can live quietly in your mouth, gut, and other mucosal surfaces without causing disease. Then the environment changes, and so can the organism. Candida albicans can shift from rounded yeast cells into elongated filaments called hyphae. That shape change helps it attach more strongly, penetrate tissue, and build biofilms with a protective matrix around the community. But finding Candida does not automatically mean candidiasis. Many healthy people carry it as part of their normal microbiota, held in check by competing bacteria, intact tissue barriers, saliva, and immune defenses. The problem begins when that balance breaks. Antibiotics can remove bacterial competitors. Dry mouth can reduce washing and antimicrobial protection. Dentures, damaged tissue, uncontrolled blood sugar, or weakened immunity may create more space for Candida to expand. Think of it as a tenant with two modes. In one form, it stays inside the apartment. In another, it grows climbing cables that grip the walls and connect to neighboring buildings. The organism did not appear from nowhere. The neighborhood stopped containing it. Candida can also cooperate with bacteria inside mixed biofilms, making the community harder to disturb than either organism would be alone. Yet, that is why vague symptoms should not be automatically blamed on Candida overgrowth. And antifungal treatment should target a real diagnosis rather than a guess. Presence is normal. Invasion is the problem. And the next ecosystem sits directly in the path of every breath. A mucus-covered border where harmless residents and potential pathogens compete for the same space. Nasal Microbiome. Every breath turns your nose into a border crossing. Air, dust, droplets, and microbes enter together, but only some are allowed to settle. Mucus traps incoming particles while microscopic cilia sweep the layer toward the throat. Beneath that moving conveyor belt lives the nasal microbiome. Communities shaped by moisture, temperature, oxygen, immune defenses, and competition for space. One resident reveals why this balance matters. Staphylococcus aureus can live inside the nose without causing symptoms, sometimes temporarily and sometimes for long periods. Colonization is not the same as infection, but the nose can become a reservoir, giving the organism an opportunity to reach damaged skin or vulnerable tissue later. And S. aureus does not control that territory alone. Corynebacterium, Dulosogranulum, and other staphylococci share the same habitat. Studies often find lower persistent S. aureus carriage when certain Corynebacterium species or Dulosogranulum pigrum are more abundant, although association does not prove that one organism directly defeats another inside every nose. The ecosystem may work more like a crowded train platform. Residents compete for attachment sites, nutrients, and influence over the local environment. Clear the platform indiscriminately, and you may remove competitors along with the passenger you wanted gone. This is why harmless carriage should not be treated like an infection without a medical reason. A healthy nasal microbiome is not an empty hallway. It is an occupied border where mucus, immune cells, and microbial neighbors help determine who stays. But the next resident lives far from oxygen-rich air. It is not even a bacterium, and it survives by consuming gas made by other microbes, methane-producing archaea. Bacteria produce the leftovers. Another domain of life arrives to collect them. Methane-producing archaea are not bacteria, even though they are also microscopic and single-celled. They belong to an ancient branch of life with different cell membranes and metabolic machinery. One of the most prominent human gut methanogens is Methanobrevibacter smithii. It survives in the oxygen-poor colon by consuming hydrogen and carbon dioxide released when bacteria ferment food, then converting them into methane. This partnership is called cross-feeding. One organism's exhaust becomes another organism's fuel. In laboratory communities, hydrogen-producing bacteria can grow in dense clusters beside M. smithii. The bacteria feed the archaeon, while the archaeon removes hydrogen that might otherwise slow bacterial fermentation. It is less like one species eating dinner, and more like an industrial chain where every factory passes its waste down the street. But methane may affect more than gas production. Higher breath methane is associated with slower intestinal transit and constipation in some people, although methane is not the only cause, and not every methane producer develops symptoms. Community structure, gut movement, diet, and individual physiology still matter. That is why archaea should not be labeled automatically as harmful. They are metabolic partners whose effects depend on the ecosystem surrounding them. And while this ancient gas-producing network operates deep inside the colon, the next ecosystem hides in a far smaller place. A skin pocket in the center of your abdomen, belly button bacteria. Researchers once swabbed ordinary belly buttons, and found something surprisingly chaotic. No two microbial neighborhoods looked exactly the same. The navel is a sheltered skin pocket where sweat, skin oil, dead cells, clothing fibers, and microbes can collect with less disturbance than on an exposed arm. Common skin residents such as Staphylococcus and Corynebacterium may appear there, but the complete community can vary sharply from person to person. A few groups are widespread. Many others are rare, appearing in only 1 or 2 individuals. Your belly button is less like a standard room and more like a tiny island, receiving random travelers from your skin, clothes, hands, and environment. Its shape helps choose who stays. A deep inward navel can trap more moisture and debris than a shallow one, creating darker, warmer microhabitats. But unusual microbes found in one sample do not automatically mean disease. DNA sequencing can detect organisms that are present in tiny amounts, temporarily passing through or no longer alive. Finding a name is not the same as proving that organism is active or harmful. Most naval communities exist quietly, held in check by dry skin, immune defenses, competition, and ordinary washing. Trouble is more likely when moisture remains trapped, skin is injured, or inflammation changes the habitat. So the goal is not to disinfect the navel into emptiness. Gentle cleaning and drying usually protect the environment better than aggressive scraping. But the final habitat has a stranger security system. Its microbes live behind a sticky barrier whose texture is partly written into your genes. Earwax. Ear canal microbes. Earwax looks like waste, but it works more like a living security barrier. Cerumen is produced from secretions of sebaceous and ceruminous glands, then mixed with shed skin cells inside the ear canal. Its oily, water-resistant surface traps dust, slows moisture, and helps create an environment where ordinary skin residents such as Staphylococcus, Corynebacterium, and Cutibacterium can live without automatically causing infection. Even the texture of this barrier is partly genetic. Variants of the ABCC11 gene strongly influence whether earwax tends to be wet and sticky or dry and flaky, changing the habitat available to microbes. But the strangest part is how the ear cleans itself. Skin inside the canal gradually migrates outward from the eardrum, carrying wax and trapped debris with it. Jaw movement from talking and chewing helps move that material toward the opening. The canal is less like a dirty pipe that needs scraping and more like a slow conveyor belt already carrying waste outside. Cotton swabs can interrupt that system by pushing wax deeper, scratching the skin, and trapping moisture behind a blockage. Once the barrier is damaged, the warm canal can shift from a stable habitat into a flooded tunnel where opportunistic bacteria or fungi gain room to grow, contributing to otitis externa. Pain, discharge, swelling, or sudden hearing? Changes deserve proper medical assessment rather than deeper cleaning. Your body was never meant to be empty. From mites inside facial pores to archaea producing methane in the gut, health depends less on destroying every resident and more on keeping each ecosystem in the place where it belongs. Which sign surprised you most? Tell us in the comments, and stay tuned for the next video by liking and subscribing to the channel. Thank you for watching.